So I want to take a couple minutes and look at some actual video and talk about hip positions that we that we talked about yesterday, and so you can actually see what's going on with some other hurdlers and then what's going on with you. Just more education. So I don't have it's not been my habit to take much video of you from behind, so I really didn't have much to work with, and so this is really the only video I have that gives me kind of a good view of you from behind. But I'm going to compare that with Aries in his world record run, and you can kind of see what he's doing versus what you're doing as far as, sort of like the position of your hips when you're running between the hurdles. So you both are coming off the hurdle right now, right? And so as you both come into landing right there, you can see right away. So now you just landed on your lead leg, right? And I can already see that your takeoff, your right leg, your right hip is already kind of ahead of the other hip, where with Aries is more square, right? So you're already projecting that hip out further, and so my assumption is you're not doing that anymore, coming off the hurdle and landing onto your trail leg. But in this instance, we'll just see what was happening before. So your trail leg is coming to the ground, and so when you both land perfectly flat on the ground, then your hips, this right hip, your trail leg hip, is forward and the other hip is backwards. Okay, so your hips are kind of like this, and you can clearly see that Aries, on the other hand, his hips are the opposite of yours, even though you're both left leg lead hurdlers, right? So your hips, his hips are going in this direction, and your hips should really be going in that direction too, but that's not what's going on. So then what happens is, if you look at Aries, right, so that's how he comes into trail leg landing. So the left hip is already forward, right? And then he allows it to push forward. That's all fine and good. So it pushes forward out of that. And then the other hip starts to come forward, but you don't see that hip really push forward. It's still basically square. So he lands and he's pushing, but that hip is square because it's sort of like what's getting ready to happen is almost like another hot foot, where the left leg is always, the right hip is always kind of staying back, right? So it's here going into, he didn't even land yet. So that's the middle step, and it's still a little bit like that. When he came off the hurdle, it was like this, right? So that was one. Then in the middle step, it's still a little bit like that. And then going into the takeoff, it's when he lands, it's there again, right? It's there again. So that right side leg hip kind of always stayed back. And that's what I was explaining yesterday. So, that's not complicated. You can, I'm sure you understood what I was saying. But again, if we look at what you're doing, and you're coming off the hurdle and your trail leg is coming forward, and you're pushing your entire hip forward with it. So now for you, when it lands, everything is more like this, right? And then it has to switch to go there on that other step, and then it's going to go there again. So it's like oscillating back and forwards, right? And so let's look at, it's not just Aries, because really anybody that's going to be able to, have a lot of power, because you get a lot of thrust right there when that lands, right? And so you got to kind of, if you allow everything to oscillate, if he allowed this hip to oscillate really forward like that, then he would be in a world of trouble, by the time he landed. And see, for you, when you land on your takeoff leg, that hip is still forward. Whereas with Aries, he's not even on the ground for landing yet, and he's already kind of got that hip forward, right? For you, it's like you land and your hip, your takeoff hip is forward, and then that other hip has to, kind of get around. So it kind of is it's a slower process, and that's what you're feeling now. Is you're getting this big push, and your hips are a certain way, and if you don't keep them that way, then you're just not going to have enough time to get everything in the right place by the time it's time for you to take off again, right? So if we even take, you can see Hansel Parchment even better, and Hansel Parchment is like 6'5" or something like that, so he's a really tall guy, right? So you can see he's coming forward, and I would say right now that his right leg hip, his takeoff hip, is a little bit forward, but by the time he hits that ground, boom, see, that hip has changed. That is changed now. He got this guy forward, which means essentially that he did, a hot foot right here. He landed, and he did a hot foot to get that guy back there, right? So now he's there, you can see the position that he's in, okay? And then he runs into that next step. So now I would say his hips are square. So the right hip worked his way forward, but it doesn't go anywhere. You see how he's pushing through, and that right hip's not really going forward. Now, right now, the left hip is twisting forward again, right? So it's essentially like another hot foot. So that right side is always consciously staying back, which gives him, so now he can come off and push there and run through that, and so everything is in the right place again, right? And then he comes off, and when he lands, you see it's already, he's not landed, he landed now. You can see the position that his body is in. That's your hot foot. I'm going to assume you're doing that. So as you're pushing out of that hot foot, right, and you land here, you can't have this right hip, push way forward, because it's too big of an oscillation, right? So that's just another person that's doing it. Watch him come off again. The hips are angled. The takeoff leg is back, right? And then it comes forward somewhat, but it doesn't push forward. So you're already right there. As he's pushing out, then it didn't come forward, which means he runs over that leg again, right? And it makes everything just quicker, okay? So I wanted you to see that, because that's pretty much probably what you're feeling in terms of getting this big burst of energy or speed or whatever, and then not kind of intuitively knowing how to play that out before you get to the next hurdle, right? So once you kind of keep everything always kind of angled, like this, then everything is going to be able to speed up more. And also when you land, you can see, let's go back to you, and you can see when you take off, see how you really are, even as you're coming into it, you're square right now, you're on the ground. So Aries and those guys, when they land on the ground here, that hip is already like this, right? That hip over here, that right side hip, it's already up and forward, which you want it, because that lead leg's got to get up over. But for you, it's coming from further back, because right now when you land, your hips are basically square at best. When you actually land, this right hip is still forward, right? And so then it's got to oscillate all the way around to get to there. Whereas with Aries and them, it's almost right here when they land. So they've kind of are, because they kept this, this hip back a little bit more. So the whole run through was one step, one step, one step, and it was kind of like that the whole time through. So that kind of gives you some more information about just mentally kind of think it through and sort of understand what's going on and everything. And so there you go, and you can work on that. By and large, you just want to have that feeling that your left foot is always landing, behind the right foot kind of thing. The left hip is always a little bit behind the right hip. So, you'll find that space where it, really works out for you, and I think you'll be good to go from there.